A hush fell over the crowded courthouse, the tension thick enough to feel like a storm gathering on the horizon. Officers stood by the doorway, their eyes narrowed in judgment, while a poised black woman stood tall in front of the bench. She had come seeking justice, but instead found prejudice tightening around her like a noose. Little did the bullies know, the one person who loved her most was a Delta Force commander, one of the fiercest warriors the U.S. Army had ever produced, stationed at Fort Bragg. In mere moments, their cruel taunts would spark a chain of events that would leave everyone stunned. Imani Daniels stood in the echoing corridors of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse in Charlotte, North Carolina. With its high ceilings and long, drawn-out hallways, the place had always felt imposing. Today, that sensation was doubled by the presence of several uniformed officers who kept glancing her way as though she were an invader in their domain. Imani wasn't new to the legal world. She had served as a paralegal in her cousin's small but respected law firm back in her hometown before moving to Charlotte. Over the years, she had grown used to the quirks of court staff, the short-tempered clerk, the busy bailiff, the harried attorneys darting in and out of the rooms. But this time was different. She could feel hostility in the air, distinct, tangible, and alive. A single fluorescent light in the hallway flickered momentarily, capturing the restless anxiety straining her nerves. The bailiff, a middle-aged man with a rigid posture, extended his arm to gesture for her to enter the courtroom. It should have been a simple matter, an old property dispute involving her grandmother's land. But Imani could already sense something twisted at play, something far more malicious behind the scenes. Behind her stood two local police officers, Officers Truman and Hensley, who smirked as they sized her up. Truman, tall with a crew cut, wore the arrogance of someone who believed the uniform entitled him to absolute authority. Hensley, shorter but stockier, looked at Imani with a sneer that made her skin crawl. Their attitudes flickered with overt prejudice, as though her mere presence offended them. Imani was no stranger to racism. She had grown up facing it in various forms, some blatant, some insidiously subtle. Yet she never wavered in her determination to stand tall. It was that unwavering sense of self-respect that they disliked. Perhaps her lawyer, a kind but exhausted older man named Eugene Fuller, had advised her that morning, stay calm, stick to the facts, and trust the justice system. She had nodded, because trusting the system was a principle she tried to abide by. But she sensed a storm on the horizon, brewing with distrust and hostility. When Imani took her seat, she immediately noticed a hush in the courtroom. She could practically feel the disapproval from certain corners, a faint murmur hanging in the air. The storm was coming. Imani remembered the words of her husband, Major Dominic Daniels, a Delta Force commander rumored to be among the fiercest soldiers in the nation. He was often away on covert assignments, leaving her to manage daily life on her own. But his unwavering support, even at a distance, had been her rock. A memory flickered in her mind from just 2 weeks ago. Dominic had called her from Fort Bragg, his voice always firm yet gentle with her, carrying a warmth that soothed her every anxiety. "If you need me, I'll be there," he'd said. "Don't let anyone push you around. You got the right to stand tall, always." Imani had brushed it off, laughing and reminding him that she was perfectly capable of looking after herself. She had no idea then that the upcoming hearing would spiral into an odyssey of intimidation, prejudice, and cruelty. As the judge entered, a stifling hush fell over the courtroom. The case was called, and Imani, with Eugene at her side, approached the bench. It began matter-of-factly. Her grandmother's property line had been in dispute ever since a developer tried to claim an extra portion of land. Imani had records dating back decades that supported her family's ownership. At first, the judge appeared fair-minded. He listened to Eugene articulate their argument without interruption. But partway through the testimony, Imani became aware of movement behind her. Officer Truman had stationed himself near the jury box, arms crossed, eyes filled with contempt. Meanwhile, Officer Hensley loomed by the door, occasionally whispering something to a fellow officer, prompting quiet snickers. Imani fought off the anxiety building in her chest. She kept her head high, focusing on the judge. "The property lines are clearly marked in the county records," she said in a clear, confident tone. "The developer's claim only arose after they discovered potential mineral deposits on the edge of the land. My grandmother lived there for over 50 years without dispute. Before the judge could respond, the attorney for the developer cut in, launching a barrage of accusations. He painted Imani's family as opportunistic, claiming the land boundaries were ambiguous. But Eugene had prepared meticulously, citing historical documents. On any normal day, this might have been a mundane property argument, but the attention in the room was saturated with something that had nothing to do with property disputes. Every time Imani spoke, Officer Truman's eyes bore into her like she had no right to be there. Every time Eugene tried to clarify a point, he was met with a condescending yawn from Officer Hensley. At a break in the hearing, the judge announced a short recess. People stood, stretching their arms and stepping into the aisle. Imani made her way toward the restrooms, ignoring the quiet stares. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Truman and Hensley following her into the hallway. As soon as she reached the more secluded corridor near the restrooms, their voices reached her. Think she owns that land? Hensley muttered. She acts like she's better than the rest of us. She's got a big mouth, that's for sure, Truman replied with a sneer. Bet she doesn't even realize she's about to lose everything. People like her usually do. Imani clenched her fists but drew a calming breath. She kept walking, refusing to let them see that their words had any impact. She entered the restroom and paused, counting to 10, focusing on her breathing. She reminded herself of Dominic's voice, his unwavering confidence in her. She couldn't afford to lose her cool, not in the middle of a legal hearing. When she emerged, the two officers stood a few feet away, arms crossed. Truman pretended to read a notice on the wall, but his gaze slid over to her, dripping with hostility. For a moment, Imani was tempted to confront them. She wanted to say, "You have no right to talk about me like that." But she held her tongue. She couldn't let them win. Not today. She chose to walk past, returning to the courtroom. What she didn't realize was that these microaggressions were only the beginning. Soon, these men would push far beyond any moral or legal boundary, and they would discover that Imani Daniels was far from alone in this world. While Imani stepped back into court, her husband, Major Dominic Daniels, was finishing a round of specialized training at Fort Bragg, located about 2 hours east in Fayetteville, North Carolina. The base was well known as the home of the Airborne and Special Operations Forces. Delta Force, or the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, thrived in its hidden corners. Dominic had earned his rank through years of grueling missions. He was respected for his strategic genius, a man as comfortable with advanced weapons as he was bridging alliances with local communities in distant conflict zones. He was a tall figure, broad-shouldered, with an intensity in his grayish-brown eyes that could unnerve lesser men. Early that morning, Dominic had finished a close-quarters combat drill with his team. Even among these elite soldiers, his reputation was legendary. The recruits whispered in the mess hall, "You don't want to cross Major Daniels," one said. "He's not just skilled, he's unstoppable." But Dominic was no tyrant. His leadership style combined discipline with compassion. He led from the front, never asking his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. Off duty, he carried an air of thoughtfulness, particularly when it came to his wife. He checked his phone during a quick water break and noticed the time. Imani's hearing would be around now. He had planned to call her before it started to wish her luck, but a last-minute drill had kept him away. Quickly, he typed a brief message. "Good luck today. I know you got this. Love you." He hit send and stuffed the phone back into his vest as his commanding officer signaled for the next round of training. Dominic's mind, however, was not entirely focused on the drills. His thoughts drifted to Imani, who always insisted she could handle herself, even in the face of adversity. He respected her independence and found it one of her most compelling traits. Yet, he always kept an ear to the ground for any sign of trouble. After lunch, as he was reviewing mission debriefs, he couldn't shake a certain feeling, a sense at the back of his mind telling him that maybe Imani could use his presence in Charlotte. But he dismissed it as baseless worry. She hadn't mentioned any trouble at the hearing. She was well prepared. Little did he know that the events unfolding in the Mecklenburg County Courthouse would soon collide with his world of hush-hush missions and unwavering loyalty, setting off a cataclysm that would test both Imani's resolve and Dominic's ferocity. Back in the courtroom, The recess ended and the hearing resumed, but the tension felt amplified. The judge asked Eugene for further documentation on the property lines. Eugene provided it calmly. The developer's attorney tried to undermine every shred of evidence, but through it all, Imani remained poised. Though inside, she braced for confrontation. As she and her attorney presented closing remarks, the judge postponed a final decision, claiming he needed time to review the documents. This was not unusual, but the atmosphere in the room felt ominous. Imani sensed that her every movement was being scrutinized. Officer Truman leaned against the wall on the left side of the courtroom. She felt the weight of his stare. Hensley, sitting in the back row, tapped his foot impatiently. When the judge exited, spectators and lawyers began trickling out. Imani collected her things, placing the documents back into her folder. Suddenly, she heard Ray's voices. "Hey!" barked Hensley. She turned around to see him pointing at her. "You're not supposed to be in here alone without an escort. Court's over." Imani frowned. The statement made no sense. People wandered in and out of courtrooms all the time without direct escorts, especially lawyers. "I'm packing up my materials," she said in an even tone, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. Officer Truman strode over. "You got a problem listening to authority?" he asked, stepping closer than was necessary. She could see the tension in his jaw. Imani stiffened but refused to yield. "I'm just finishing up. Is there a reason I can't gather my documents?" Truman's face twisted into a sneer as he hovered over her, using his height to intimidate. "Your attitude isn't appreciated. You'd think someone in a court hearing would know how to follow directions." Eugene, noticing the commotion, came to her side. In a polite but firm tone, he said, "Officers, there's no need for hostility. We're leaving." Hensley grinned, showing a row of slightly yellowed teeth. "Watch your tone, old man," he warned. "We're the law around here." Any neutral observer would have found their behavior unprofessional, but there were few onlookers left in the courtroom. Imani felt a slow burn of anger in her gut, but forced herself to remain calm, scanning the room for any sign of a judge or bailiff. There were none. She slung her bag over her shoulder and walked toward the exit, ignoring their aggressive stances. Just as she crossed the threshold, Hensley muttered loudly, "Guess we better keep an eye on that one. Never know what they might do." It was a pointed remark, ugly, hateful, and meant to provoke. Imani's heart pounded as she paused in the corridor. Eugene touched her arm gently, urging her not to engage. She obliged for now. That evening, she could barely sleep. She replayed the day's events in her mind, feeling a swirl of anger and worry. She knew bigotry still existed, but the blatant manner in which these officers flaunted it in a courtroom stunned her. She wondered if perhaps she should have heeded Dominic's silent warning to reach out if anything fell off, because something definitely fell off, and it was only going to get worse. Imani awoke at 3 a.m. to the sound of tires crunching on the street outside her modest rental house. The moonlight filtered to the curtains, illuminating the bedroom in a faint glow. A wave of dread washed over her as she looked at the silhouette of a police cruiser parked across the road. Her heart drummed heavily. She checked her phone. No missed calls, no messages. She thought about calling Dominic, but it was the middle of the night. He might be asleep or possibly even on base and not able to answer. She resolved to wait and see if the cruiser was just passing through, but it didn't move for almost an hour. The car sat there, engine idling. Imani's mind conjured all sorts of worst-case scenarios. She questioned if she was being paranoid. Perhaps the officer was doing routine surveillance on the street for a completely unrelated matter. Finally, headlights flickered and the vehicle drove off. Imani felt a jolt of relief. But the next morning, as she backed out her driveway, she noticed a different cruiser down the block. Just seeing it made her nerves stand on end. She ran errands, hoping the day's normal activities, groceries, bank deposits, a trip to the pharmacy, would ground her. But each time she got on the road, she felt like she was being watched. She couldn't shake the feeling of a creeping gaze following her. After stopping at a gas station, she spotted a familiar face behind a tinted patrol car window. Officer Truman. Her stomach lurched. He made eye contact and gave her a mocking salute revving his engine as he slowly followed her out of the parking lot. Imani tried to maintain her composure, pulling onto the main road. The patrol car stayed a few car lengths behind. When she turned right, it turned right. When she turned left, so did he. This continued for over 15 minutes, a slow, ominous dance through Charlotte streets. Finally, she turned toward a large public library. She knew they had security cameras and a lot of foot traffic. The cruiser sped up, then veered away. She parked and sat in her car, hands trembling on the steering wheel. An abuse of power, a brazen show of intimidation. She whispered aloud, "What do they think they're doing?" She wondered if it was because they felt threatened by her case, or if they simply wanted to remind her her place. She had read about police harassment, but experiencing it firsthand brought it to a whole new level of terror. Imani gathered her courage and stepped inside the library. She found a quiet corner to steady her nerves. She contemplated contacting the local NAACP or civil rights lawyer, but first, she decided she would tell Dominic everything. In a secluded spot between the library's towering shelves of books, she dialed Dominic's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. No answer. She left a voice message, trying to keep her tone calm. "Hey, Dom, it's me. Listen, there have been some issues with a couple of officers after my court hearing. I don't want to worry you, but it's starting to feel like harassment. Give me a call when you can." She ended the call, her heart still pounding. Dominic would want to rush to her aid, but she knew he was on an intensive schedule. Maybe he was in the middle of a training exercise. Regardless, she felt a little more at ease knowing she had put the situation on his radar. It took until late that afternoon for Dominic to see the missed call. He had been on the training grounds in the scorching North Carolina sun, drilling with new recruits. When he finally returned to his quarters and checked his phone, Imani's voice message set off alarm bells in his head. He called her back immediately. Her phone rang and rang, eventually going to voicemail. He left a message, his voice tight with concern. "Imani, it's Dominic. I got your message. Call me back. I want to know what's going on. I'm here for you." His mind churned through scenarios. Police harassment? This was unacceptable. Dominic prided himself on being a law-abiding soldier, a man who respected legitimate authority. But if there was corruption or racism at play, he had zero tolerance. And he wasn't above using his influence if necessary. With every hour that passed without hearing from her, his anxiety grew. Around dinner time, his phone finally buzzed. He snatched it off the table. "Imani," he answered. Her voice sounded exhausted. "Hey, Dom. Sorry I missed you. My phone died while I was out." He could almost feel her tension through the line. "Are you safe?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "For now," she replied, but her voice trembled slightly. "But I have a bad feeling. They followed me, Dom. They parked outside my house last night, and then they followed me around town today." She paused. "They were in court yesterday, too. The same officers." It felt personal. Dominic's hand clenched into a fist. "Were their names?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Officer Truman and Officer Hensley. Charlotte PD." Dominic repeated the names, committing them to memory. He had dealt with intimidation tactics in war zones where insurgents tried to rattle his team's nerves. But hearing that his wife was being subjected to such harassment in her own city enraged him. "I'm coming," he said, an edge in his voice. "I'll talk to my commanding officer and arrange some leave. Hang tight. Stay somewhere safe. I'll be there soon." Imani exhaled. "I hate dragging you away from your duties. This is important." Dominic cut her off. "No one messes with you. Not on my watch." His fierce protectiveness poured through every syllable. Imani felt relief wash over her. They agreed to talk again soon, and Dominic promised to call back once he had a definite plan. It took him only an hour to finalize a short leave. Such requests from a Delta Force commander weren't taken lightly, but Dominic's record of excellence, combined with the urgency in his request, convinced his superiors to grant him a few days off. He packed a small duffel bag, his mind already racing with what he'd do once he got to Charlotte. He wasn't one for theatrics, but if those officers thought they could bully his wife, they had just awakened a sleeping giant. The next day, Imani tried to continue life as usual. She went to the post office, dropped off some paperwork at her cousin's law firm, and then returned home to prepare for Dominic's arrival. She told herself it would be okay. Dom would straighten this out, or at least keep her safe until they found a legal remedy. However, early that evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, she heard a thunderous knock at her front door. Her heart leapt into her throat. Carefully, she peered through the side window. There stood Officer Truman and Officer Hensley, arms crossed, radiating hostility. The porch light illuminated their badges, and in the looming shapes behind them were two additional officers. Imani's mind raced. They hadn't shown a warrant, and she had no pending legal issues aside from the property dispute. Why were they here? She mustered her courage and opened the door a crack, leaving the security chain on. Yes. Truman stared at her with cool contempt. We need to talk. There have been noise complaints in the neighborhood, and we have reason to believe you might be involved. Imani's eyebrows shot up. Noise complaints? I just got home, and I live alone. I'm not making any noise. Hensley sneered. That so? Mind if we come in and look around? Her heart hammered, but she knew her rights. I do mind, actually, unless you have a warrant. You can't just come into my home. Truman's eyes narrowed. Don't get smart with us. Imani refused to be intimidated. I'm aware of my constitutional rights, she said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. You can't barge into my home without probable cause or a warrant, and a made-up noise complaint isn't probable cause. She saw Truman's jaw flex. For a moment, he looked ready to tear the door off its hinges, but he reined himself in. Watch your step, Miss Daniels, he spat, practically spitting her name. You never know when you might need our help. Hensley smirked. We'll be keeping an eye on this house. Good luck. They turned on their heels and left, the additional officers trailing behind. Imani quickly closed the door, her breathing ragged as she locked it, every nerve on alert. She felt shaky, furious, and violated. She quickly called Dominic. He picked up on the first ring. They were just here, she whispered, pressing her forehead against the door. Who, Truman and Hensley? Dominic growled. Yes, and a couple of others. They claimed there were noise complaints. They want to come in, but I refuse without a warrant. Silence fell on the line for a moment. Then Dominic said, You did the right thing. I'll be there tonight. I'm on my way. Imani's tears finally came unbidden, as a wave of relief and anger washed over her. I'm so angry, Dom. They're acting like they can do anything they want. They can't, he assured her. I promise you that. Imani paced the living room until she heard the rumble of Dominic's Jeep pulling into the driveway 2 hours later. She dashed outside to meet him. He stepped out, his imposing figure a sight that brought her instant comfort. Without a word, he enveloped her in a tight embrace. In that moment, she felt safe again, if only briefly. But what she didn't know was that the tension with the local police was about to escalate far beyond intimidation tactics, leading to a dramatic confrontation that none of them would soon forget. That night, Dominic insisted on staying up, keeping watch. He slept lightly on the living room couch, dozing off for half an hour at a time, then jolting awake at every minor noise. Morning arrived without any further disturbances. No knocks on the door, no lurking cruisers. After breakfast, Imani decided it was best to collect all her documentation, everything related to property dispute, and store it safely at her cousin's law firm. Dominic accompanied her, scanning the streets as they drove. He noted the possible vantage points, alleyways, and side roads, instincts from years of special operations automatically kicking in. They might have singled you out because they think you're alone, he said. Dominic said quietly, and Imani gripped the steering wheel. I'm not alone now, she said, a fierce edge in her voice, so different from her usual gentle manner. I'm tired of being afraid in my own city. When they arrived at the law firm, Dominic insisted on stepping inside with her. The office staff, mostly paralegals and receptionists, couldn't help but stare at his imposing presence. He wore civilian clothes, jeans and a simple t-shirt, but his posture screamed military training. Imani placed her legal documents in a locked cabinet. Her cousin gave her a warm hug, offering moral support as they left. Dominic was more convinced than ever that the police wouldn't give up so easily. Their brand of intimidation rarely evaporated overnight. Sure enough, as they pulled back onto the main road, Dominic spotted a cruiser at the corner of the block. The moment their car passed, he saw the cruiser pull out behind them. Imani, noticing his tight grip on the dashboard, looked in the rear-view mirror. "They're tailing us again, aren't they?" she asked, dread coiling in her stomach. Dominic nodded. "Drive normally. Don't give them any reason to stop you." Imani maintained the speed limit and obeyed every traffic rule to the letter, but the cruiser followed them all the way to a shopping plaza. Instead of heading home, they parked near a busy grocery store. "That's them," Imani whispered, glancing across the lot. Officer Truman and Officer Hensley were in the front seat. She recognized their faces as they slowly coasted by, glaring daggers. Dominic calmly unbuckled his seatbelt. "Let me handle this," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Before Imani could protest, Dominic stepped out of the car, shutting the door behind him. He walked across the parking lot with a purposeful stride, heading straight for the cruiser. He stopped about 10 feet away and raised his hand slightly to show he wasn't armed. Truman rolled down the window, an irritated scowl on his face. Hensley's hand hovered near his holster. Dominic's voice was measured. "Officers," he said, "I see you've been following my wife. Care to explain why?" Hensley smirked. "Move along, buddy. This is police business." Dominic clenched his jaw, but maintained composure. "I'm Major Dominic Daniels, U.S. Army, stationed at Fort Bragg. My wife's been harassed, followed, and threatened. I suggest you stop." Truman's eyes narrowed. "Threatened? We're just doing our job, Major, unless you're interfering with a police investigation." Dominic didn't flinch. "Is there a legitimate investigation, or is this about intimidation?" In the silence that followed, Hensley's lip curled with disdain. "We have reason to believe your wife's involved in suspicious activity," he lied smoothly. "We're keeping an eye out for the safety of the community." Dominic let out a slow exhale. "If you have accusations, file them. Otherwise, leave her alone. Because I promise you, if this continues, I won't hesitate to take matters further." Hensley bristled. "You threatening us?" Dominic's voice was cold as steel. "No, I'm telling you that no one harasses my family without consequences, legal consequences." A tense moment passed. Then Truman flicked on the cruiser's siren for a second, a nasty grin spreading on his face. The shrill wail echoed in the parking lot, turning heads. Truman then revved the engine and slowly drove off, leaving Dominic standing there, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Imani, from the car, let out the breath she'd been holding. She saw Dominic return, his face set in grim determination. He opened the passenger door and climbed in, shaking his head. "They're not backing down," Dominic said, more to himself than to Imani. She started the engine. "Then we won't either," she replied, her voice quivering yet resolute. "Not after what they've done." Dominic placed a hand gently on her shoulder. He felt the weight of the conflict pressing on them. He had faced fearsome enemies in foreign lands, but this was a personal war fought on home soil against men who wore the badge that was supposed to symbolize justice, not oppression. "Justice," Dominic whispered. "They messed with the wrong family." As the day wore on, Dominic and Imani tried to find some semblance of normalcy. They returned to her house, planning to cook dinner and discuss the next steps, possibly contacting higher authorities or even the FBI if the local police refused to intervene. Night fell quietly, but a suffocating tension loomed in the air. Dominic looked out the window repeatedly, scanning the street. No suspicious cruisers this time, at least not yet. Imani tried to relax on the couch, reading over some legal documents, but every creak of the floorboards made her jolt. Around 9 p.m., just as Dominic was about to suggest turning in for the night, the house lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Imani froze, her heart pounding. Dominic's instincts roared to life. Power outage or sabotage. He grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and motioned for Imani to stay put. Cautiously, he peered out the window. The rest of the streetlights were on. Only Imani's house was dark. Dominic's blood ran hot. Someone had cut the power. "Stay low," he whispered. "Lock the back door. I'll check the breaker." Imani scrambled to secure the back entrance, her eyes darting nervously in the gloom. Dominic stepped outside, scanning the yard with practiced vigilance. The breaker box on the side of the house was open, wires clearly tampered with. Shadows shifted near the fence. Dominic clicked off the flashlight and dropped low. He saw two figures in dark clothing creeping along the perimeter. Their silhouettes were faint, but their posture and movement suggested a familiarity with stealth. Whoever they were, they had either significant training or at least some street-honed skill. Dominic suspected police involvement. They could be off-duty officers wearing plain clothes. He moved with quiet precision, approaching them from behind. As he drew closer, he heard muffled whispers. "Should be easy. Scare them a bit more. Make sure there's no camera footage." Rage flared in Dominic's chest. He inched closer, silent as a panther. Suddenly, one of the figures heard a rustle and spun around. Dominic lunged, catching him in a lock that immobilized his arms. The intruder choked in surprise. The other figure, taller and built like Hensley, rushed forward. Dominic released a swift elbow to the first man's gut, sending him sprawling. The second man charged, and Dominic sidestepped, grabbing his wrist in a joint lock that forced the intruder to drop whatever he was holding, a crowbar. But the second man was strong, and with a surge of brute force, he broke free. He fumbled for a sidearm at his waist, cursing under his breath. Dominic didn't hesitate. He delivered a punishing kick to the man's chest, knocking him backward. The intruder wheezed and stumbled. Imani, hearing the commotion, cautiously opened the back door. Her eyes widened as she saw Dominic engage in what looked like a life-or-death struggle. She fumbled for her phone and dialed 911. Her voice trembling, she said, "Someone's breaking into our house. We need help." The operator tried to calm her, but Imani knew there was no time to wait. She grabbed a heavy flashlight and rushed into the yard. By the time she arrived, Dominic had subdued the taller intruder, pinning him to the ground. The shorter man had scrambled to his feet, wielding a small pistol aimed at Dominic's back. Imani's heart lurched. Without hesitation, she whipped the flashlight at the shorter man's arm. The metal casing struck him, causing him to cry out and drop the gun. Dominic whirled, catching the man's wrist and locking it in an agonizing hold. Breaths ragged, Dominic and Imani caught a glimpse of the intruder's faces under the faint glow from a neighboring house's floodlight. Sure enough, they recognized the man. Officer Hensley, and the other was an officer they had seen briefly in the courthouse. Though not Truman, Hensley spat. "You'll regret this." Imani felt her world tilt. These men, police officers, had cut her power and tried to break in, presumably to intimidate or plant something incriminating. The fact that such a brazen act could happen in her own backyard was horrifying. Sirens wailed in the distance, approaching quickly. Imani exhaled in relief, hoping that these responding officers would be different. Dominic kept Hensley pinned, his Delta Force training evident in every movement. But as multiple patrol cars pulled up, lights blazing, Imani had no idea if these newly arrived officers would side with her and Dominic or side with their colleagues. One thing, however, was certain. The men who had tried to terrorize them had picked the wrong house. Uniformed cops flooded the yard, guns drawn, flashlights bobbing through the darkness. Dominic released Hensley slowly, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. Imani stood by, trembling but resolute, pointing at Hensley and the other man. "They broke into our house. They cut the power and tried to attack us." Hensley, gasping for air, immediately went on the offensive. "He assaulted us. We were responding to a call about a disturbance." Imani felt her blood boil. Disturbance? There was no call until I made it. I was the one who called 911. The newly arrived officers exchanged glances, unsure whom to believe. Then the commanding officer on the scene, Sergeant Wheeler, a woman in her mid-40s, stepped forward. She had sharp features and an authoritative presence. Her gaze swept over the scene, taking in the cut wires, the crowbar, and the pistol on the ground. "Officers Hensley and Martin," she said, addressing the intruders. "Explain yourselves." Hensley's face was mottled red. "We got a tip about a break-in. We arrived to find this man," he pointed at Dominic, prowling around. Dominic spoke calmly. They cut the power and entered private property without a warrant. They attacked us. Ask my wife, he added. She called 911. Sergeant Wheeler surveyed the yard. Her flashlight revealed footprints near the breaker box, the dropped crowbar, and the wires still dangling from the panel. She glowered at Hensley. Mind telling me why you have a crowbar, and we're messing with the breaker box? Hensley stammered. It was forced open when we arrived. Imani's eyes flashed. I saw him with the crowbar. He was trying to break in. A tense silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the police radios. Finally, Wheeler signaled 2 other officers. Cuff them, she ordered, pointing to Hensley and Martin. Hensley's eyes went wide. Sergeant, wait. This is all a misunderstanding. Cuff them, Wheeler repeated, her voice firm. She turned back to Dominic and Imani. Sir, ma'am, we'll sort this out at the station. We have dash cam footage of which units were dispatched and when. We also have the 911 logs. If your story checks out, these men are in serious trouble. Relief coursed through Imani, but she remained guarded. She'd heard stories about precincts circling the wagons to protect their own. Still, at least for now, it appeared they had an officer, Sergeant Wheeler, who might seek the truth. In the whirlwind that followed, statements were taken, evidence was collected, and tension soared. Dominic remained stoic, answering questions succinctly. Imani found herself reliving the horror, detailing how she discovered them tampering with her power and how Dominic subdued them. The entire ordeal lasted until well past midnight. Eventually, Sergeant Wheeler allowed them to return home, promising a thorough internal investigation. Imani's mind spun. Could the system be trusted to hold them accountable? As they drove back, Dominic broke the silence. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. You held your own. That flashlight throw was perfect. She smiled wearily. I just did what I had to do. He reached over and squeezed her hand. The warmth of that simple gesture lit a flame of resolve in her. These officers, Hensley and Martin, were behind bars for the night, at least. But what would happen when the investigation was over? Would the system truly hold them accountable? Dominic and Imani finally returned home, but unease still lingered. Dominic advised Imani to stay in the Jeep for a moment while he walked around the perimeter, checking every window and door. Nothing seemed amiss now, and the power had been restored by the utility company, but the air still felt charged with tension. Inside, exhaustion sank into Imani's bones. She let out a long sigh. I can't believe this is happening here. This is supposed to be a peaceful neighborhood. Dominic shook his head. Corruption can fester anywhere. He gently brushed a stray curl away from her forehead. We'll get through this, but we need to plan carefully. I have resources and contacts, people who can make sure a real investigation takes place. Imani nodded, remembering that Dominic had not just served in Delta Force for years, but also had connections in the intelligence community. He'd worked with FBI liaisons on certain domestic threat cases, even if the details were always hush-hush. We'll do whatever it takes, she said. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a spark of hope. They were no longer alone, and maybe, just maybe, they had a shot at justice. Over the next few days, a flurry of developments unfolded. Sergeant Wheeler's investigation uncovered worrisome details about Truman, Hensley, and Martin. Complaints of harassment and excessive force had been filed against them before, but had been swept under the rug. The paper trail pointed to a network of officers who abused their power, particularly targeting minority communities. The case gained traction within the Charlotte PD, and soon internal affairs got involved. Imani found herself giving multiple statements, each time more confident, knowing she now had unwavering support at her side. Dominic, in turn, reached out to some colleagues he knew from his joint operations with federal agencies. His discreet calls made it clear that if Charlotte PD dropped the ball, higher levels of law enforcement would step in. Imani's property dispute was still pending before the court. Ironically, the developer's attorney tried to distance himself from the scandal involving the officers. He insisted that the developer had no connections to police corruption, but Imani suspected there was more behind the scenes. Someone might have used unscrupulous means to sway the outcome of her case. One afternoon, as the city buzzed with rumors of police misconduct, Imani received a surprising phone call. It was from the judge handling her property dispute. He requested a meeting in his chambers, off the record, with only her and Eugene present. They arrived at the courthouse, hearts pounding. The judge, a man in his 60s with measured gaze, greeted them sternly. "I wanted to speak with you because something came to my attention," he began, his temple veins throbbing. "There was an attempt by certain officers to influence this property case. They tried to cast suspicion on your claim. I assure you, Miss Daniels, that will not stand." Eugene looked stunned. "Your Honor, we appreciate your transparency. Does this mean—" The judge cut him off. "It means that I'm reopening the hearing, and I will scrutinize every piece of evidence from the developer as well as any allegations of police interference. I don't take kindly to corruption in my courtroom." Imani felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor. All I want is a fair decision based on the truth." He offered a curt nod. "That's what the law demands." The next day, headlines blared about the arrest of 2 Charlotte officers on suspicion of attempted burglary and assault. Pictures of Hensley and Martin, faces grim, made the front page of the local paper. Word spread that more arrests could follow if evidence linked other officers to their activities. Imani couldn't help feeling both vindicated and uneasy. This was a victory, but what if the entire precinct turned against her and Dominic? Despite these fears, she reminded herself that there were still good people out there, people who wanted justice, not corruption. Cops like Sergeant Wheeler were determined to uphold the law. She also had the unwavering protection of a man whose loyalty was forged on battlefields far away, Major Dominic Daniels, a Delta Force soldier who would stop at nothing to keep her safe. The corrupt cops had no idea just how dangerous he could be when the safety of his loved ones was threatened. News of the arrest rocked the developer's legal team. The property dispute was set for a fresh hearing, this time with added scrutiny. When the day arrived, the courtroom overflowed with onlookers, reporters, and members of the public, all curious about the case at the center of a corruption scandal. Imani, wearing a professional navy blue suit, walked in with Dominic at her side. She held her head high, exuding quiet confidence. Eugene followed, carrying a thick folder of evidence. Across the aisle, the developer's attorney looked noticeably anxious, flipping through papers with sweat staining his shirt collar. When the judge took the bench, a hush settled over the room. This hearing was about more than just property lines. It was a symbolic showdown between truth and corruption. Eugene began by outlining the history of the land, citing a clear chain of title in Imani's family. He then methodically poked holes in the developer's counterargument, revealing how certain county records had been mysteriously altered. The judge listened intently, occasionally glancing at the developer's attorney, who squirmed in his seat. Halfway through proceedings, the judge brought up the police harassment. "Miss Daniels, it's come to my attention that certain officers attempted to intimidate you. Could you elaborate on that?" Imani stood, her voice steady but charged with emotion. She recounted the steps of harassment, the stares and smirks in court, being followed around town, the false noise complaint in her house, and finally, the break-in. The courtroom hung on her every word. Even the gallery seemed to hold its collective breath. When she finished, Dominic felt an overwhelming sense of pride. She spoke with grace and power, refusing to be silenced by fear. Next, the developer's attorney tried to object, insisting these allegations had nothing to do with the property lines. But the judge wasn't swayed. "It speaks to the integrity of the process," he said firmly. "If there's evidence that anyone has tried to sway the outcome of this case improperly, it is entirely relevant." He then allowed Sergeant Wheeler to take the stand. She detailed the evidence found on Hensley and Martin, linking them to efforts to tamper with Imani's property. Hensley's phone record showed multiple calls to a private investigator hired by the developer. There were even suspicious bank deposits into Hensley's account, suggesting bribery. The gallery exploded in hushed murmurs. The judge's face hardened. He paused for several moments, letting the revelation sink in. Finally, he cleared his throat. "We're dealing with a multi-layered conspiracy to deprive a legitimate property owner of her rights and to intimidate her into giving up those rights." His words reverberated in the hushed chamber. Slowly, the judge took off his glasses. I see no valid basis for the developer's claim on Miss Daniels' property. Furthermore, the evidence strongly suggests malfeasance among certain individuals, including these officers, to tip the scales of justice in favor of the developer. Tension broke like a snapped tether as the judge pounded his gavel. Miss Daniels, your family's claim stands. The property is yours, and this court apologizes for threats and intimidation you endured. A wave of relief triumphed, and disbelief washed over Imani. People in the gallery erupted in applause, a rarity in such a formal setting. Eugene gently patted her shoulder, his eyes brimming with tears of pride. Dominic squeezed her hand, smiling. Quietly, he locked eyes with her, his expression saying everything, "You've won, and I'm so proud." Outside the courtroom, reporters clamor for statements. Imani, exhausted but exhilarated, declined most interviews. She made a brief statement. "I'm grateful for justice. I hope this leads to reform so nobody else has to go through such intimidation." The cameras flashed. Dominic hovered protectively at her side, leaving no doubt that she was not alone in this fight. Truman was notably absent that day, rumored to be under investigation as well. Eventually, word would break that he was implicated in the ring of bribery and intimidation. The corrupt circle within the precinct was being dismantled from the inside out, piece by piece. Imani found herself at the heart of a story of karma. The bigots who thought they could bully her in court never imagined she was married to a Delta Force commander, a man who would stand by her with unwavering tenacity, or that the truth itself would serve as their ultimate downfall. In the weeks following the court's ruling, the Charlotte PD's internal affairs continued unraveling the threads of corruption tied to the developer and certain officers. Several more arrests followed, including Truman, who'd attempted to flee the state, only to be caught at a highway checkpoint. Imani's life settled back into a calmer rhythm. The property belonged securely to her family, free from harassment or sabotage. The developer, facing legal repercussions, withdrew any appeal, choosing instead to distance themselves from the scandal. Still, the emotional toll lingered. Imani found herself waking at night, startled by nightmares of men breaking in. Dominic, though proud of her fortitude, worried about her mental well-being. He encouraged her to seek counseling, reminding her that trauma could sneak up on even the strongest individuals. She agreed, and with professional help, she began to heal. Meanwhile, Dominic's short leave from the Army was nearing its end. He'd have to return to Fort Bragg soon. Sitting at the kitchen table one morning, they discussed the future. Imani traced the rim of her coffee mug, a thoughtful look in her eyes. "I can't go back to the way things were, Dom. I've realized there's a bigger fight out there for civil rights. I can't ignore it." Dominic nodded, understanding blossoming in his eyes. "You want to get involved? Maybe start working with advocacy groups." She took a deep breath. "Yes, I want to help others who face harassment or discrimination. I was lucky to have you and the judge who actually listened. Not everyone's so fortunate." A gentle smile tugged at Dominic's lips. "I think that's a calling worth following, and you'll have my full support." Her heart warmed. She rested her hand over his. "I know your work is important too. We'll figure out a way to balance both of our paths." They leaned in, foreheads touching, finding comfort in each other's presence. As winter approached, Charlotte's crisp air carried the scent of change. The uproar around the corrupt officers faded from the headlines, replaced by new stories. But for Imani, the impact remained. She took steps to ensure her voice continued to echo through the community. She joined panels discussing police reform, offered legal insights pro bono at her cousin's firm, and visited neighborhood events to empower residents about their rights. In a turn of fate that felt almost poetic, she was invited back to the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, not as a defendant, but as a keynote speaker for a seminar on ethical policing and community relations. The irony didn't escape her. The same halls where she'd been mocked and intimidated now welcomed her to speak on justice. Dressed in a modest yet elegant outfit, she stood at the podium, scanning the audience of police officers, community leaders, and local activists. Sergeant Wheeler sat in the front row, arms folded, listening intently. The once intimidating space now felt like a platform for... Imani began, her voice steady. I stand before you today because the system tried to fail me, but I refuse to let it. I refuse to surrender to fear, and through perseverance, accountability, and a tremendous support system, justice prevailed. She recounted her story, careful to highlight that not all officers were villains, and that allies like Sergeant Wheeler proved there was hope for a better path. By the time she finished, the room erupted in a standing ovation. Imani's eyes glistened with tears of gratitude. She spotted Dominic at the back, his broad shoulders and proud stance unmistakable. He was due to leave for his next mission soon, but he wouldn't have missed this for the world. Outside, as they walked hand in hand down the courthouse steps, a pair of local journalists approached. "Miss Daniels, can we have a statement?" one asked. Imani paused, glancing at Dominic, who gave her an encouraging nod. She turned to face the cameras. "My only statement is this. Courage and truth can break even the strongest chains of fear and corruption, and I hope our community continues to stand up for what's right." That clip aired on the evening news, signaling a kind of closure to her ordeal and a hopeful beginning to her future activism. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster journey of courage, resilience, and ultimate justice. Imani Daniels, targeted by corrupt officers and threatened for her rightful property, turned the tables thanks to her own iron will and the unwavering support of her husband, a Delta Force commander feared by many but guided by integrity. Their fight exposed a hidden network of corruption, safeguarded her family's land, and forever changed how an entire community views the power of truth over intimidation. If you found this story powerful, inspiring, or just downright thrilling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us continue creating compelling, uplifting content that highlights the triumph of hope against all odds. Spread the word so others might find courage in Imani's journey. And remember, standing up for what's right can transform not only your own life, but the world around you.